Have you ever watched an industry look a woman in the eye and tell her that everything she knew, every hour she had spent learning, practicing, failing, and perfecting, was no longer worth a damn? Let me tell you about Dorothy Vance. Dorothy Vance was 53 years old when the last parts distributor in Harlan County stopped returning her calls. She ran a small repair operation out of a converted equipment shed on her family's land in eastern Kentucky, about 12 miles from the nearest town with a stoplight. The shed had been her father's before it was hers, and before that it had belonged to his father, though back then it was just a place to keep the plow dry. By the time Dorothy inherited it, she had filled it floor to ceiling with something most people in the county considered worthless: broken water pumps. Not decorative ones, not antiques collected for nostalgia. These were cast iron, submersible well pumps, centrifugal pumps, hand pitcher pumps, deep well cylinder pumps. The kind of equipment that had been pulling water out of the Kentucky ground since before electricity reached these hills. Farmers dropped them off because they had no idea what else to do with them. A pump would fail, they would pull it, buy a new one from the co-op, and then look at the rusted carcass sitting in their truck bed and think, I probably shouldn't just throw this in the creek. So they called Dorothy. She never charged for the drop-offs. That was her policy from the beginning, and people thought it was charity or maybe eccentricity, the way some old women collect cats. It was neither. Dorothy had been repairing well pumps since she was 19 years old. Her father had taught her, and his understanding of the machines was the kind that doesn't come from a manual. He knew why the leather cup seals behaved differently in February than in August. He knew which brands of impeller would pit out in iron-heavy water within 3 years, and which ones would outlast the house above the well. He knew how to diagnose a pump that was running, but not producing simply by listening to it through a length copper pipe pressed against the wellhead casing. Dorothy had learned all of it, and then she had kept learning after he was gone, because there was always more to know. What she had, though no one used this word for it, was mastery. The county didn't see it that way, neither did the industry. Through the 1990s and into the early 2000s, Dorothy maintained relationships with 3 regional part distributors who supplied her with replacement impellers, shaft seals, motor windings, pressure switches, and drop pipe fittings. She was not a high-volume customer. She repaired maybe 80 to 100 pumps a year, mostly for small farms, a few private residences, 2 or 3 small churches that still relied on well water. The distributors tolerated her orders the way a hardware store tolerates the customer who comes in once a month to buy one odd bolt. She was not the business they were building toward. The business they were building toward was the new construction market. Subdivisions spreading out from Lexington and Louisville, developers needing new pump systems by the dozen, standardized equipment, quick fulfillment, no custom work, no old units, nothing that required someone to actually understand what they were touching. The distributors retooled their inventories accordingly. Specialized parts for older pump models, anything manufactured before roughly 1985, quietly disappeared from their catalogs. When Dorothy called to reorder a particular style of bronze impeller she had been using for 15 years, the sales rep told her they no longer stocked it. When she asked where she might source it, he told her he didn't know. When she asked if he could find out, he told her that honestly, the demand for that type of repair work just wasn't really there anymore. She thanked him and hung up the phone. Then she walked back out to the shed and looked at the pumps. There were at that point somewhere between 200 and 250 of them stacked on wooden pallets, hanging from wall hooks, sitting in labeled milk crates organized by make and manufacture year. She had been collecting and cataloging them for more than a decade, pulling usable parts from units too far gone to repair, noting in a spiral-bound ledger which models shared which components, dollars, cross-referencing wear patterns with water chemistry data she had gathered informally from the farms she served. It was, though she would not have described it this way, an archive. Dollars. A library of mechanical knowledge that existed nowhere else in the county, possibly nowhere else in the state. Dollars. She did not panic. That was the thing about Dorothy that people who knew her mentioned most when you asked about her. She did not perform She looked at the pumps, she thought for a while, and then she went back inside and made a list. Dollars. There was a man in the county named Dale Hutchins who sold farm supplies and had, for several years, been quietly skeptical of Dorothy's operation. Not hostile exactly. Dale Hutchins was a practical man, and he reserved hostility for things that had actually wronged him, but skeptical in the way that practical people are skeptical of anything they cannot immediately price. Dollars. He had said to Dorothy, on at least 2 occasions she could recall, that the old pumps were a liability and that she ought to think about transitioning into something with a future. Servicing the new variable speed submersible systems. Getting certified on the newer equipment. He said it with the tone of a man who believes he is doing a woman a favor by being direct. Dollars. Dorothy had listened both times. She had not argued. She had gone home and kept doing what she was doing. Dollars. What Dale Hutchins did not know, what almost no one in Harlan County knew, was that the aquifer feeding most of the private wells in the eastern part of the county was not behaving the way aquifers were supposed to behave. Dorothy knew because she had been paying attention for 20 years. The water table in that part of the county shifted unpredictably. Dollars. The mineral content varied by location in ways that accelerated wear on the newer stainless steel pump components that the industry had standardized around. The variable speed drives that Dale Hutchins thought represented the future were in that particular geography prone to failures that the manufacturers had not anticipated and their warranties quietly did not cover. Dollars. Dorothy knew this because she had seen it happen, slowly, over the course of 2 decades of service calls and pump autopsies and conversations with well drillers who had been working these hills since the Eisenhower administration. Dollars. She did not write it up. She did not send it to anyone. She simply kept her pumps and kept her ledger and kept her shed. Dollars. Then in the summer of 2009, the water started going wrong. Dollars. It didn't happen everywhere at once. It started with 3 farms in the northeastern corner of the county, the brewer operation, the Stiles family place, dollars, and a small goat dairy run by a woman named Patrice Odom, who had moved out from Hazard about 8 years earlier. Their new submersible pumps, all of them installed within the previous 5 years, dollars. All of them from the same regional contractor who had expanded into the county on the strength of the new construction boom, began failing. Dollars. Not wearing out slowly, failing. 1 pump seized entirely. 1 lost its prime and couldn't recover it. The 3rd burned out its motor in less than 18 months, which was about 4 years before it was supposed to. Dollars. The contractor came out. He diagnosed the motors. He said the failures were unusual and submitted warranty claims on behalf of 2 of the 3 farms. The manufacturer's representative drove up from Knoxville, inspected the units, and informed the farmers that the failures were consistent with improper installation, which voided the warranty. The contractor said the installation had been correct. The manufacturer's rep said it had not. Dollars. The farmers were caught between them with no water and no resolution. Dollars. It was Patrice Odom's daughter who called Dorothy. Dollars. She had heard about Dorothy from a neighbor, the kind of passing mention people make when they're not sure if the information is useful but figure it can't hurt. Dorothy drove out to the Odom place on a Thursday morning, pulled the failed pump, took it back to her shed, and spent the better part of 2 days disassembling it. What she found was exactly what she had expected to find and had been waiting, without wanting to be right, to find for years. Dollars. The mineral composition of the water coming through that part of the aquifer was reacting with the alloy used in the new pump's impeller housing in a way that accelerated galvanic corrosion well beyond normal parameters. The pump had been the right pump for a different place. In this place, it had been failing from the day it was installed, just slowly enough that no one noticed until it was too late. Dorothy wrote up her findings in a 2-page letter, plain language, no technical posturing. She included a sketch of the corrosion pattern. She told Patrice Odom what kind of replacement pump would actually hold up in that water, where to source it, and what to tell the well driller she would need to hire to do the installation. Patrice Odom read the letter twice and then said, "How much do I owe you?" Let's see if the pump works first. It worked. Word moved through the county, the way word moves in places where people still talk to each other across fence lines and at the feed store and after church on Sunday mornings. Within 6 months, Dorothy had more work than she had seen in years. Within a year, she had a waiting list. Not just for her repair services, though those were in demand, but for her assessments. Farmers who were being told by contractors and distributors that their well systems needed complete replacement started calling Dorothy first. She would come out, look at the existing pump, pull it if she had to, examine the wear patterns, test the water, check her ledger, and tell them what they actually needed. Sometimes what they actually needed was a new pump. Sometimes it was a replacement impeller she had salvaged from one of the units in her shed, remachined to fit. Sometimes it was just a seal and a shaft bushing and a conversation about their water chemistry. She was not cheap, she had never been cheap, and she did not become cheap now. But she was right, consistently and demonstrably right, in a way that no one else in the county was equipped to be. Dale Hutchins drove out to see her in the fall of 2010. He pulled into her gravel drive on a Tuesday afternoon, parked his truck, and walked over to the shed where she was working. She was resleeping a pump cylinder, a job that required patience and a particular kind of manual press that she had adapted from an old valve tool her father had left her. She did not stop working when he walked in. She acknowledged him and kept her hands moving. Dale Hutchins looked around at the shed, at the pumps on the pallets, at the ledger on the workbench, at the organized crates of salvaged parts. He had been in this shed before years ago, and he remembered thinking it looked like the storage unit of someone who couldn't let go. He did not say this now. He said, "I've been hearing your name a lot lately." I expect you have. He said, "I owe you an apology. I told you more than once that this work didn't have a future." Dorothy stopped what she was doing. She put down the tool she was holding, slowly, the way people do when they want to give a moment its proper weight. She looked at Dale Hutchins for a long few seconds. She said, "I know you did." How long has your waiting list been?" She said, 4 months, and that's just the assessments. The repairs are closer to 6. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Is there anything you need that I could help you source?" Dorothy thought about it. There was a particular grade of bronze stock she had been having to order from a supplier in Ohio because no one closer carried it. There were a handful of pump models, early 1970s Gould's units, mostly, that she had been searching for to cannibalize for parts and couldn't locate in any quantity. She told him both of these things. He wrote them down. He found the bronze stock within 2 weeks through a metals supplier in Lexington he had done business with for years. The Gould's units took longer, about 3 months, but he eventually located a farm estate liquidation in Pike County with 7 of them sitting in an outbuilding, and he called Dorothy the day he found out. That was the beginning of something neither of them had a word for at the time. A working relationship, eventually a friendship of the plain-spoken kind that develops between people who respect each other's competence. Dale Hutchins sent customers to Dorothy. Dorothy called Dale Hutchins when she needed materials. Neither of them ever mentioned the previous conversations again, the ones where he had advised her to move on. Dollars. There are things in this world that look like they're standing still when they're actually waiting, accumulating, building towards something that the people moving fast around them can't see because they're moving too fast to look. Dollars. Dorothy Vance's shed looked, from the road, like a woman who hadn't cleaned out her late father's junk. It looked like stubbornness, or maybe sentiment, or maybe just the particular inertia of someone who had never quite figured out how to let things go. That is how it looked from the road. That is not what it was. Dollars. What it was 20 years of paying attention in a place that other people had stopped paying attention to. 20 years of noticing what broke and why, what held and under what conditions. Dollars. What the water was doing to the metal and what the mineral ratios in the aquifer were doing to the water. Dollars. 20 years of writing it down in spiral-bound ledgers that she kept on a shelf in the back of the shed behind a row of cataloged impellers, where no one but Dorothy had any reason to look. Dollars. The industry had moved on. Dollars. It had standardized and optimized and chased the larger markets and continued the parts that low-volume customers like Dorothy needed and retrained its sales force to stop fielding questions about equipment that had been out of production since before some of those sales reps were born. Dollars. The industry had done exactly what industries do when they are functioning normally. It had made rational decisions in aggregate that turned out to be catastrophic in particular. Dollars. And Dorothy had stayed. Dollars. There is a version of this story where Dorothy Vance gets credit. Dollars. Where someone writes it up properly and her name ends up in a trade journal or a local paper, or at minimum in the conversation people have at the county extension office when the subject of well infrastructure comes up. Dollars. That version exists, but it is not the one most people in Harlan County would tell you. The version they tell you is quieter. It is, you have a problem with your pump, you call Dorothy Vance. Dollars. It has been that way for a long time. It will probably be that way for as long as Dorothy is working. Dollars. She is not slowing down. She hired a part-time assistant last year, a young woman named Kelsey, who had grown up 3 farms over and who Dorothy had been watching for a few years. Dollars. Noticing the quality of her attention when problems presented themselves, Dorothy taught her the ledger system first, not the mechanics. Those could come later. Dollars. Would come later through repetition and failure and correction, but the ledger, the habit of writing down what you see. Dollars. The understanding that knowing something is only worth something if you remember it precisely and can find it again. Dollars. Kelsey asked her once, about 6 months into working together, why she had kept all the broken pumps, all those years, all that space, all those people probably thinking she was a little odd for it. Dollars. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Outside the shed it was early spring, still cold enough to see breath, and the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property was running fast and loud from the snowmelt. Dollars, she said, because nobody else was going to. Dollars. Kelsey thought about that for a while. Then she nodded and she went back to what she was doing. Dollars. Some knowledge doesn't transfer through catalogs or training manuals or anything that can be uploaded or outsourced or moved to a facility in another country. Some knowledge transfers only person to person through years of close and patient work in sheds that look like junk piles to people driving past. You might have already passed 100 of those sheds without knowing what was inside them. Dollars. And when the industry finally needs what's in there, when the standard solution fails and the warranty is void, and the contractor is pointing fingers at the manufacturer, and the manufacturer is pointing fingers at the ground, there will be exactly one phone number to call. Dollars. The question is whether anyone thought to write it down. Dollars. I think about Dorothy Vance sometimes when I'm tempted to throw something away just because the world has stopped seeing a use for it. Dollars. There's a moment in her story that stays with me. It's not the dramatic one, not the failed pumps or the warranty disputes or even Dale Hutchins standing in her shed eating his words. It's the quiet moment before all of that. Dorothy, alone, hanging up the phone after a distributor told her the parts she needed weren't worth stocking anymore, and then walking back out to the shed. Not crying, not calling anyone. Dollars. Just looking at what she had built and deciding, without fanfare, to keep building it. Dollars. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a long, private relationship with doing the right thing even when no one is watching and no one is keeping score. Dollars. Dorothy didn't maintain her ledgers because someone was grading her. She didn't catalog the wear patterns on pump impellers because there was a prize for it. Dollars. She did it because it was honest work and because the people who depended on their well water deserved someone who took that seriously. Dollars. That's a choice that gets made quietly, over and over again, in the early mornings and the long afternoons when it would have been just as easy to let things slide. Dollars. I think what I respect most about her is that she never confused being overlooked with being wrong. Dollars. That's harder than it sounds. When an industry tells you that your skills are obsolete, when the sales rep stops calling back, when someone like Dale Hutchins says you ought to think about transitioning into something with a future, there's a pressure in that. A slow, accumulating pressure that wears on even capable people. Most of us, I think, would have started to doubt ourselves, would have wondered if maybe they were right. Dollars. Would have spent energy trying to prove something to people who weren't paying attention anyway. Dollars. Dorothy didn't do that. She kept her eyes on the actual problem, the water, the wells, the farmers who needed both to work, and she kept learning, kept refining, kept adding to that ledger. The intelligence she built over 20 years wasn't just technical. It was the intelligence of someone who knows how to pay attention over a long stretch of time without needing external validation to keep going. Dollars. And then when the moment came, when the aquifer started behaving the way she had quietly anticipated, and nobody else had the knowledge to respond, she was ready, not because she had been lucky, because she had been diligent in a way that looked, from the outside, like stubbornness. Dollars. That cause and that effect were not separated by accident. They were connected directly by 2 decades of small, serious choices. Dollars. The last part of her story is the one I find myself returning to most. Teaching Kelsey the ledger first. Not the mechanics, not the repair sequences, the habit of writing down what you see. The understanding that knowledge is only worth something if it's preserved carefully enough to be found again. That's not a technical lesson, that's a moral one. It's Dorothy saying, I will not let this die with me. Dollars. There's something in that worth sitting with. Whatever it is you actually know, the hard-earned, specific, unglamorous kind of knowing that took years to build, someone, somewhere will need it. The question Dorothy answered, every single day, for 20 years, was whether she would be ready when they did.